silencing the room to deliver the line that was supposed to end me. Mom and Dad are signing the house to me tonight. Sarah gets nothing. Cheers erupted. My parents beamed. But they didn't see my smile. They didn't know that while they were wrapping gifts, I was wrapping a foreclosure notice. And they certainly didn't know that the nothing I was getting was actually my freedom. On Christmas Eve, the air in my parents' dining room wasn't filled with the scent of pine or roasted turkey. It was thick with the smell of victory, premature, unearned victory. My sister, Ashley, stood up from the mahogany table, tapping her crystal champagne flute with a silver fork. The sharp ding 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 silenced the room instantly. She looked like a holiday ornament come to life, draped in a red velvet dress that cost more than my first car. Her face flushed with the excitement of someone who believes they have finally won the lottery. "Everyone please," Ashley announced, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. She reached out and grabbed my mother's hand. Then my father's. "Mom and Dad have given me the ultimate Christmas gift. Tonight, they are officially signing the deed of the house over to me. The house is officially mine. Sarah gets nothing." The room didn't just react. It exploded. My aunts, uncles, and cousins erupted into cheers, whistles, and applause. My Uncle Jerry actually slammed his fist on the table in approval, shouting, "About time!" My mother wiped a tear from her eye, looking at Ashley with the reverence usually reserved for religious icons. My father puffed out his chest, beaming. I didn't clap. I didn't gasp. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, swirling the deep red wine in my glass, watching the liquid coat the sides. I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a demolition expert wears right before they press the button to bring down a condemned building. "But you already know the foundation is rotting, don't you?" I thought to myself. I set my glass down with a deliberate audible clink against the coaster. The sound was soft, yet somehow, it cut through the noise like a knife. "Dad," I said, my voice low but perfectly audible in the sudden lull. "Should I tell them? Or will you?" His face drained of color faster than I'd ever seen. The smug grin vanished. Ashley froze, her glass halfway to her mouth. In that suspended moment, the festive warmth evaporated. Everyone knew something was coming. Before I tell you what happened after that silence, I want to ask, where are you listening from tonight? It helps to know there are people out there who understand what it's like to survive a family like mine. My name is Sarah Bennett. And if you had walked into that house an hour before the toast, you would have seen a perfect Hallmark movie. A 12-foot Douglas fir loaded with heirloom ornaments, a crackling fire, and a family pretending they didn't measure love in dollar signs. But families like the Bennetts don't break with screaming matches or thrown plates. They break in the fine print. They crack in the quiet decisions of who gets supported and who gets sacrificed. For as long as I can remember, I lived in the shadow of the golden child. Ashley was the sun my parents orbited, bright, demanding, and incapable of doing wrong. I was just the moon there to reflect their light when convenient, and ignored when the sun was up. I didn't hate Ashley growing up. I just learned early on that while she was given a roadmap, I was given a shovel and told to dig my own path. While she got tutors and dance camps, I got lectures on fiscal responsibility and building character. By the time I moved to Seattle to build a career in tech, my parents called me distant and cold. They didn't understand that distance was the only armor I had. This Christmas felt different from the moment I parked my rental car in the snowy driveway. The house was manicured to within an inch of its life, but there was a frantic energy underneath. My mother was vibrating with anxiety, checking the roast every 5 minutes. My father was drinking scotch earlier than usual. And Ashley? She was floating. But when I walked into the dining room, I noticed a new detail I hadn't seen in previous years. On the mantel, right next to the stockings, was a large, legal-sized envelope wrapped in a ridiculous gold bow. It wasn't just a prop. It was center stage. And right next to my assigned seat at the table, someone had placed a pen. Not just any pen, but the heavy, expensive Mont Blanc my father only used for signing contracts. They thought they were setting the stage for my humiliation. They didn't know I had brought my own props. Buried deep in my oversized tote bag, beneath a scarf and a laptop, was a black binder. It didn't have a bow. It held the truth. and I was ready to gift wrap it for them. To understand why I wasn't panicking at the dinner table, we have to go back 6 months. The house transfer didn't start as a Christmas surprise. It started as a calculated ambush on a humid Saturday in August. I was back in Seattle, buried in work, when my mother called. Her voice was sickeningly sweet. The kind of tone she used when she wanted to brag to her friends about my job title, but never actually asked me about my day. She demanded I come home for the weekend. It's important, Sarah. A family matter regarding the estate. We need your signature to protect the legacy. Legacy. That was their favorite word. It usually meant money they wanted to keep or debt they wanted to hide. I flew down, exhausted and wary. When I arrived, there was no warm greeting, no, how are you? They ushered me straight to the dining room table, the same table where Ashley would later make her toast. My father had a manila folder open in front of him. Ashley wasn't there, which was my first red flag. Usually, if there was good news, Ashley was front and center. If there was work to be done, it was just me. Sweetheart, Dad began, using a term of endearment that felt like sawdust in his mouth. We've been talking to our financial planner. We want to ensure the house stays in the family. We're getting older, and we think it's best to add your name to the title now. Joint tenancy. It simplifies inheritance, avoids probate taxes. We just need a simple signature. He pushed the document toward me. It looked standard enough to the untrained eye. A quit-claim deed, adding me as an owner. Mom was hovering behind me, her hands on my shoulders, massaging them tensely. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, Sarah. You're the responsible one. We know you'll manage the asset better than anyone. The flattery was so thick I could almost taste the desperation. My stomach churned. This was the scapegoat's intuition. A survival instinct you develop when you realize your parents view you as a resource, not a person. Why me? Why not Ashley? The apple of their eye. I need to read this over, I said, reaching for the folder. It's standard legalese, Dad barked, his patience snapping instantly. Why do you always have to complicate things? We're trying to give you a gift. Half the equity in this house. If it's a gift, then my lawyer reviewing it won't change anything, I countered, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'll take it back to Seattle and FedEx it next week if everything looks good. The silence in the room was heavy. My mother's hands stopped massaging my shoulders and gripped them hard, almost painfully. Dad looked like he wanted to lunge across the table, but they couldn't stop me without admitting something was wrong. Reluctantly, Dad let me take the folder. Back in Seattle, I didn't just read it. I took it to a real estate attorney, a woman named Elena who had seen it all. She sat at her glass desk, flipping through the deed. And then she did something my parents didn't expect. She ran a title search on the property. She didn't smile. She spun her monitor around so I could see. Sarah, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave. This isn't a gift. It's an anchor. Your parents aren't just giving you equity. If you sign this and go on the title, the liens attach to you. Liens? I asked, blinking. Ideally, the house is paid off. They've lived there for 30 years. Not anymore, she explained, pointing to a long list of red text. There are 3 separate liens against the property. One is a massive home equity line of credit that's maxed out. But the other 2? Those are federal tax liens. And there's a notice of default pending from the lender. They haven't paid the mortgage in 8 months, and they haven't paid property taxes in 2 years. She looked me dead in the eye. They aren't trying to give you the house for inheritance. They are trying to transfer partial ownership to you, so that when the bank or the IRS comes to collect, they can leverage your credit score and your income to stall the foreclosure. Or worse, you become liable for saving the asset because your name is on the deed. I stared at the screen. The numbers were staggering. Over $250,000 in debt, wrapped in a lie about legacy. That was the moment the last thread of loyalty I had for them snapped. I didn't feel angry immediately. I felt cold. I realized that, to them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a credit line. I was a bailout plan. So, I didn't sign the papers. I ghosted them on the topic, citing busy work weeks and legal delays. I watched from afar as they grew more desperate, and then, 2 weeks before Christmas, the tone shifted. They stopped asking me to sign. Suddenly, everything was perfect. They were giddy. That's when I knew they had moved on to plan B. If the smart sister wouldn't take the bait, they would feed it to the greedy one. They were going to give the debt to Ashley, and they were going to frame it as a victory so she would sign without reading. I spent the next week compiling public records. I printed every lien, every IRS notice, every foreclosure warning. I put them in my black binder. I wasn't going home for Christmas to celebrate. I was going home to make sure that when the grenade went off, I was the one holding the pin. The silence in the dining room was heavy enough to crush a lung. My father's hand hovered over his scotch glass, trembling just enough to make the ice cubes clink a tiny, betraying sound in the vacuum of the room. "Sarah," my mother hissed, her voice tight and low, dropping the sweet matriarch act entirely. "Don't you dare do this. Not tonight. This is your sister's moment." "Oh, I know," I replied, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm just trying to clarify the terms of the gift before Ashley signs anything. I mean, we're all family here, right? No secrets on Christmas." Ashley rolled her eyes, a gesture she had perfected in high school and never outgrew. She looked down at me with a mixture of pity and disdain, clutching the deed to her chest like it was an Oscar. "You are so jealous, Sarah. It's honestly pathetic. Just because Mom and Dad realized I'm the one who actually cares about this family and you're the one who ran off to Seattle to be a cold-hearted workaholic, doesn't mean you have to ruin my night." She turned to the room, flashing a blinding smile at our relatives. "She's just upset because she thought she was entitled to the house. But Mom and Dad know who will actually fill it with love." My Aunt Karen nodded sympathetically, murmuring, "Poor thing," directed at me. "They all bought it. Of course they did. They saw the expensive decorations, the catered food, the tailored suits. They didn't see what I saw." I looked around the room. Really looking. I noticed that the heirloom painting over the sideboard was gone, replaced by a cheap print from HomeGoods. I noticed that my father's Rolex was missing from his wrist for the first time in 20 years. And the heating? It was kept unusually low, despite the freezing snow outside. The house wasn't a palace, it was a stage set, and the production budget had run out months ago. "I'm not jealous, Ash," I said, my voice calm, cutting through her performance. "I'm worried. Because usually, when people give a gift worth $500,000, they don't wrap it in a panic." "Panic?" Dad slammed his glass down, splashing amber liquid onto the white tablecloth. The stain spread like a fast-moving infection. "That is enough. You are drunk, Sarah. Go to your room. Go to your room." "I'm not the one with the shaking hands, Dad," I countered. I turned my gaze to Jason, Ashley's fiancé. He was a nice enough guy, an accountant who liked things to add up. He had been quiet until now, watching the exchange with a furrowed brow. "Jason, you work in finance? Quick question. If a property is transferred via a quitclaim deed for love and affection rather than a sale, does the new owner assume the existing liens on the title?" The room went dead quiet again. Dad's face turned a shade of purple that looked dangerous. Mom looked like she was about to faint. Jason adjusted his glasses, looking from me to Ashley. Well, yes, technically. The debt stays with the land. If the title transfers, the new owner has to satisfy the liens or the bank can foreclose. But... He looked at Dad. "But you guys said the mortgage was paid off last year. That was the whole point of the retirement party." "Exactly!" Ashley snapped, glaring at me. "It's paid off. Sarah is just lying to scare me." "Am I?" I asked softly. I reached down into my tote bag. The sound of the zipper opening was the loudest thing in the room. Grandma Rose, sitting at the far end of the table, stopped chewing. She was the only one who didn't look confused. She looked at me, her dark eyes sharp and intelligent, and gave me the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. "Go on," she seemed to say. "Burn it down." I pulled out the black binder. It was thick, heavy with 3 inches of paper. I placed it on the table, pushing aside the untouched centerpiece of holly and ivy. "Ashley," I said, resting my hand on the cover, "before you pick up that Mont Blanc pen and sign your life away, I think you should look at what you're actually inheriting. Because it's not a house. It's a crime scene. Ashley stared at the binder as if it were a bomb. In a way, it was. I don't want to see your stupid fake papers. Ashley spat, though her voice wavered. She looked to Mom for backup, but Mom was busy burying her face in her napkin, weeping softly into the linen. It was a tactical cry designed to garner sympathy and stop the conversation, but I wasn't buying it. They aren't fake, Ashley, I said, flipping the cover open. These are public records. Certified copies from the county clerk's office. I pulled them 3 days ago. I slid the first page across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of Jason's plate. That, I pointed, is a notice of default filed by the bank 4 months ago. The mortgage isn't paid off. In fact, they refinanced 3 years ago to pull out $150,000 in equity. They spent it. All of it. And they haven't made a payment since August. Jason picked up the paper. His hands were steady, but his face went pale as he scanned the legal jargon. This says the principal balance is $380,000, and the arrears are $14,000. Give me that! Dad lunged across the table, trying to snatch the paper, but Jason pulled it back, his accountant instincts kicking in. He wasn't a son-in-law right now. He was an auditor finding a discrepancy. Wait, Daniel, Jason said, his voice hardening. Is this true? Is there a mortgage? It's a misunderstanding, Dad shouted, spit flying. We're in a dispute with the bank. It's a clerical error. We're handling it. Handling it? I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. I flipped to the next tab in the binder. Is that why you stopped paying property taxes too? Because here is a lien from the county for $12,000 in back taxes. I slid that paper to Uncle Jerry. He looked at it, his mouth hanging open. The about time champion was suddenly very quiet. And the piece de résistance? I said, pulling out a document stamped with the terrifying logo of the IRS. A federal tax lien against Mom and Dad personally for $85,000. Unpaid income tax. I looked directly at Ashley. She had backed away from the table, the deed forgotten in her hand. She looked like a child who had walked in on her parents fighting scared, confused, and refusing to believe the monster was real. Ashley, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. If you sign that deed tonight, you become the owner of the property. The bank won't care that you didn't know. The IRS won't care that it was a gift. They will see a new owner with a fresh credit score and a decent income. They will come for you. They will garnish your wages. They will put a lien on your future condo. You aren't getting $1 million asset. You are inheriting over $500,000 in immediate toxic debt. That's not true, Ashley whispered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She turned to Dad, grabbing his arm. Daddy? Tell her she's lying. You said I was the favorite. You said this was my legacy. Dad couldn't look at her. He stared at the tablecloth, his jaw working furiously. It was the most cowardly thing I had ever seen. It was an investment strategy. Mom suddenly shrieked, lifting her head. Her mascara was running, making her look like a raccoon. We were going to fix it. We just needed time. If you signed, we could have refinanced again under your name, paid off the back taxes, and everything would have been fine. We did it for the family. For the family? Jason stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. You were going to use Ashley's credit as a life raft because you drowned yourselves? You were going to trick her into bankruptcy on Christmas Eve? We would have paid her back. Dad roared, finally looking up, his eyes full of hate directed squarely at me. You ruined everything, Sarah. You ungrateful, spiteful little. I saved her life. I cut him off, slamming the binder shut. I saved her from starting her marriage with a foreclosure on her record. I saved her from the IRS knocking on her door. I didn't ask you to save me, Ashley screamed, throwing the deed at me. It fluttered like a wounded bird and landed in the gravy boat. Why do you always have to be right? Why couldn't you just let me be happy for one night? Because, I said, happiness based on a lie isn't happiness, Ashley. It's a delusion. And the eviction notice isn't a delusion. Eviction? The word rippled through the guests. Oh, didn't I mention? I checked my watch. The foreclosure auction is scheduled for January 15th. You have 3 weeks to vacate. That's why they needed you to sign tonight. They needed a new name on the title to file an emergency bankruptcy and stall the sale. The room was spinning out of control. My aunt was fanning herself. Jason was untying his tie as if he couldn't breathe. But the final nail in the coffin wasn't the binder. It was the doorbell. Ding dong. It rang out with a cheerful, festive chime that felt utterly grotesque given the atmosphere. Dad froze. He looked at the door with genuine terror. Who is that? Mom whispered. We didn't invite anyone else. I took a sip of my wine. I didn't invite him, I said. But I think the state of Washington did. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. A persistent, demanding buzz that sliced through the tension in the dining room like a serrated blade. My father stood frozen by the head of the table, his face a mask of sheer panic. He looked at the front door as if it were a portal to hell. Don't answer that, he whispered, his voice cracking. Nobody answer that. It's probably just carolers. Or a delivery mistake. Carolers don't ring like they're trying to break the button, Dad, I said calmly, not moving from my seat. I swirled the last dregs of wine in my glass. And delivery drivers don't usually come at 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve in a blizzard? My mother was gripping the tablecloth so hard her knuckles were white. Daniel, make them go away, she hissed. Just make them go away. Just, Uncle Jerry, the man who had cheered for my disinheritance just minutes ago, looked between my parents and the door. He was a loud man, a blusterer, but he wasn't stupid. He sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The air in the room had curdled. The festive warmth was gone, replaced by the cold draft of impending reality. I'll get it, Jerry grumbled, pushing his chair back. No, Dad shouted, lunging forward. But he was too slow, and frankly, he was too broken. He stumbled against the sideboard, knocking over a silver candle holder. The candle rolled onto the carpet, unlit, a pathetic symbol of his loss of control. Jerry ignored him and marched to the foyer. We all turned in our seats, necks craning. I saw Ashley wiping her eyes, her mascara now a dark smudge across her cheek, looking less like a beauty queen and more like a tragic figure in a gothic novel. Jason hadn't moved. He was staring at the wall, his accountant brain likely recalculating the last 3 years of his life. The heavy oak door creaked open. A gust of wind blew snow into the entryway, swirling around the boots of the man standing there. He wasn't Santa Claus. He was a large man in a thick gray parka, holding a clipboard protected by a plastic cover. He stomped his boots on the mat, shaking off the snow with a businesslike efficiency that chilled me more than the weather. Is this the residence of Daniel and Martha Bennett? The man asked. His voice carried into the dining room, flat and loud. Yeah, they're eating, Jerry said, blocking the way. Who are you? The man didn't answer Jerry. He looked past him, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto my father, who was leaning against the sideboard, looking like he might vomit. Daniel Bennett, the man called out. He stepped around Jerry, uninvited, bringing the cold and the smell of wet wool into our sanctuary. He walked right up to the dining room archway. And Martha Bennett? Mom let out a small, strangled sob. I'm a process server for the King County Superior Court, the man announced. He wasn't yelling. He didn't have to. The silence in the room was absolute. I have been trying to serve you both for 3 weeks. You have gated the driveway, you haven't answered your phones, and you returned the certified mail. But the law says I have to deliver these in person. He reached into his bag and pulled out 2 thick packets of documents, bound with heavy staples. You are hereby served with a summons and complaint for foreclosure, he said, extending the papers. Dad didn't take them. He just stared, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. The server didn't care. He dropped the packet at Dad's feet. Thud. And this, he said, turning to Mom, is a summons regarding the tax lien enforcement. You have a court date on January 4th. He dropped the second packet on the table, right next to the turkey. It landed with a wet slap, damp from the snow. Merry Christmas, the man said, without a trace of irony. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the door wide open. The wind howled through the house, blowing the napkins off the table, extinguishing the candles, and freezing the last remnants of the Bennett family legacy. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. We just listened to the wind and the sound of my mother's jagged breathing. The perfect Christmas was officially dead. The corpse was lying on the floor, wrapped in legal paper. The sound of the front door slamming shut, courtesy of Uncle Jerry, broke the spell. The house was suddenly quiet again, but it was the quiet of a tomb, not a library. Jason was the first to move. He stood up slowly, his movements precise and heavy. He walked over to where the tax summons lay on the table. He didn't ask for permission. He picked it up and flipped to the summary page. He read it for a long moment, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. $260,000, Jason read aloud. His voice was devoid of emotion, which made it terrifying. Plus penalties, and the house has zero equity left. He looked up, staring directly at Ashley. She was trembling, her hands clutching the edge of the table as if the floor were tilting beneath her. Jace, she whispered, reaching a hand out toward him. Baby, please, we can fix this. We can get a lawyer. My parents, they just made a mistake. A mistake? Jason laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Ashley, they tried to trick you into signing the deed tonight. They knew the server was coming. That's why they rushed it. They wanted your name on the title before he got here. They wanted to tie my assets to their debt. He looked at my parents with pure disgust. You people are predators. You aren't parents. You're predators. Don't you speak to us like that, Dad shouted, trying to muster some shred of authority. We raised her. We gave her everything. We were doing this to keep the house in the family. You were doing it to save your own skins, Jason yelled back, his composure finally cracking. You were going to let us drown so you could float for a few more months. He turned to Ashley. And you, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You stood there and mocked your sister. You laughed when they cut her out. You were so desperate to be the winner that you didn't even check the prize. I didn't know, Ashley sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining the collar of her red velvet dress. I swear, Jason, I didn't know. Maybe not, Jason said, pulling a ring box out of his pocket. No, wait. He reached for his hand. He pulled off his engagement ring. It wasn't a traditional engagement ring, but a simple gold band we had all admired. He placed it on the table next to the tax summons. But you should have. Sarah knew. Sarah figured it out because she actually pays attention. You just wanted the applause. Jason, no! Ashley screamed, scrambling out of her chair. She grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. Don't leave. Please, we can just walk away. We don't have to sign it. I am walking away, Jason said, stepping back. I'm walking away from this house, from this debt, and from this family. I can't marry into a family that treats fraud like a holiday tradition. He didn't look back. He walked into the hallway, grabbed his coat, and walked out the front door into the snow. The slam of the door echoed the earlier arrival of the process server. A final punctuation mark on the end of their relationship. Ashley collapsed onto the floor, sobbing hysterically. My mother rushed to her, wrapping her arms around her, wailing along with her. He didn't deserve you. We'll find someone better. Someone who understands loyalty. The guests began to stir. It was a mass exodus. Aunt Karen grabbed her purse, muttering something about a headache. Uncle Jerry didn't even say goodbye. He just grabbed his coat and hustled his family out the door. Within 3 minutes, the room was empty except for the 4 of us and Grandma Rose. I slowly began to pack my things. I put the binder back into my tote bag. I zipped it up. The sound was satisfying. Are you happy now? Dad asked. He was slumped in his chair, looking 20 years older than he had an hour ago. He stared at me with eyes full of venom. You drove him away. You humiliated us. Are you happy? I slung my bag over my shoulder and stood up. I looked at the wreckage of the dinner, the cold turkey, the spilled wine, the legal papers on the floor, the sobbing sister. No, Dad, I said softly. I'm not happy. I'm relieved. I'm relieved that for the first time in my life, The truth is actually sitting at this table with us. I walked over to Grandma Rose. She looked up at me, her eyes clear. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Drive safe, Sarah," she said. "The roads are slick." "I will, Grandma," I said. I kissed her cheek. I walked to the door. Ashley looked up from the floor, her face blotchy and ruined. "Where are you going?" she choked out. "You can't just leave me here with them." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. The cold air was seeping in. "You wanted the house, Ash," I said. "You wanted to be the favorite. You wanted to be the one who stayed." I opened the door. The snow was falling softly, covering the world in a clean, white blanket. "Now you are." I didn't drive straight to the airport. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly to navigate the icy highway, so I checked into a generic motel about 10 miles from my parents' house. It was the kind of place with flickering neon signs and coffee that tasted like battery acid, a stark contrast to the velvet-draped candlelit stage I had just exited. But as I sat on the stiff mattress, watching the snow pile up against the window, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I turned my phone off. I knew what was happening on the other end of the line. I knew my father would be leaving voicemails that swung wildly between rage and pathetic begging. I knew my mother would be sending texts filled with guilt trips about destroying the family. I wasn't ready to hear them. When I finally turned my phone back on the next morning, the notifications flooded in like a broken dam. 47 missed calls, 63 texts. "Dad. You ungrateful brat. You humiliated us. Mom. How could you? Ashley is devastated. Call us immediately. Dad. Pick up the phone, Sarah. We need to discuss the lawyer." I deleted them all without listening. The only message I opened was a voicemail from Grandma Rose. Her voice was crackly, sounding older than usual, but sharp. "Sarah, honey, don't answer them. Jason packed his things and left for a hotel. Your father is currently screaming at the bank on the phone, as if shouting will make the debt disappear. Ashley hasn't come out of her room. You did what you had to do. Stay safe. I love you." I spent Christmas Day alone in that motel room, eating vending machine snacks and watching old movies. It was lonely, yes, but it was honest. 2 days later, I was back in Seattle, standing in my high-rise apartment overlooking the gray waters of the Puget Sound. The physical distance helped, but the emotional tether was harder to cut. It wasn't until New Year's Eve that I finally heard from Ashley. She didn't call my cell, she called my work line, bypassing the block I'd put on her number. When I picked up, there was a long silence on the other end. "He's really gone, Sarah," she whispered. "No hello. No preamble." Her voice sounded hollow, scraped clean of the arrogance that had defined her for so long. "I know, Ash," I said, leaning back in my office chair. "I'm sorry. Thanks for watching. I'm sorry." "He sent a courier for the rest of his things," she continued, her voice trembling. "He didn't even come himself. He sent a stranger to pick up his golf clubs and his books. He left a note saying he couldn't build a future on quicksand." "He was right," I said gently. "You can't." "Mom and Dad say it's your fault," she said. "They say if you hadn't brought that binder, Jason would have signed the marriage certificate, and we could have figured the debt out later. They said you sabotaged me because you were jealous. Do you believe that?" I asked. The silence stretched out again. I could hear her breathing, jagged and wet. "I want to," she admitted. "It would be so much easier to just hate you, to believe that you're the villain and they're just unlucky." But then I saw the letters. "What letters?" "The ones the process server dropped," she said. "I read them, Sarah. All of them. Dad tried to throw them away, but I dug them out of the trash. They took out the second mortgage 3 months after I got engaged. They spent it on the country club dues, the lease on Dad's BMW, and my engagement party." She let out a choked laugh. "They paid for my engagement party with money that was going to cost me my house. They were celebrating my future by selling it." "I tried to warn you," I said. "I know," she whispered. "I know. And that's the part that hurts the most. You were the only one telling me the truth, and I treated you like garbage. I don't know what to do, Sarah. They're talking about bankruptcy lawyers. They want me to co-sign a loan for an apartment. They say they need my credit score because theirs is shot. Ashley, listen to me very carefully. I said, my voice hard. Do not sign anything. Not a lease, not a loan, not a utility bill. If you tie yourself to them now, you will drown with them. You need to get out. But where will I go? She cried. I don't have any money. Jason paid the rent on our old place. I spent my savings on the wedding deposits, which are non-refundable. You have a degree, I reminded her. You have skills. You start over. It's going to be hard, and it's going to be ugly. But it's better than being their lifeboat. I'm scared, she admitted, sounding like the little sister who used to ask me to check under the bed for monsters. You should be, I said. But you're free. Don't let them pull you back in. January 15th, the date of the foreclosure auction. I didn't go back for it. I didn't need to. In the digital age, you can watch your childhood home be dismantled from 1,000 miles away. I logged onto the county sheriff's auction site from my laptop, sipping coffee that was far too bitter. There it was. Lot number 492. Single-family residence. 4 bedrooms. 3 baths. Occupied. The opening bid was shockingly low, just enough to cover the bank's principal. I watched the numbers tick up. It wasn't a bidding war. It was a scavenger hunt. Investors were picking over the bones of my parents' FOD. In the end, it sold to a faceless LLC for a price that would barely cover the first mortgage. There would be nothing left over. No equity, no inheritance, just a deficiency judgment and a tax bill that would follow them to the grave. Grandma Rose called me that evening. She had moved into a senior living facility a week prior, a move I had helped finance because I knew my parents would no longer be able to care for her, nor would they want to. It's done, Grandma said. The sheriff came at noon, gave them 24 hours to vacate the premises. Did they go quietly? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Quietly? Grandma snorted. Your father threatened to sue the sheriff. Your mother fainted on the front lawn twice. The neighbors were watching from their windows. It was the grand finale they always feared, public and shameful. Where did they go? They found a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, she said. It's next to the train tracks. No dishwasher, no view, and certainly no dining room for hosting grand dinners. And Ashley? I asked, the question that had been gnawing at me. She didn't go with them, Grandma said. And I could hear the pride in her voice. She packed her bags. She told them she wasn't signing the lease. She's staying on a friend's couch for now. She got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. It's not glamorous, and it barely pays the bills, but she's doing it on her own. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since Christmas Eve. Ashley had listened. She had finally chosen the hard truth over the comfortable lie. A few weeks later, I received a package in the mail. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my mother's frantic, looping script. Inside was a box. I opened it to find a stack of old pictures of me as a child, my college graduation, and family vacations. On top was a note, written on the back of a past-due electric bill. Sarah, since you clearly don't care about this family, we thought you should have these. We don't want reminders of a traitor in our new home. You got what you wanted. We have nothing. Hope you're satisfied, Mom. I flipped through the photos. There was me at age 7, missing a front tooth, standing in front of the house that was no longer theirs. Me at graduation, looking for my parents in the crowd, not knowing they had left early to beat traffic. I wasn't hurt. The venom in the note had lost its potency. It was the lashing out of a cornered animal. I took the box and placed it on my bookshelf, right next to the black binder which I had kept as a reminder. I looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, the lights twinkling in the dusk. They were right about one thing. I was satisfied. Not because they were suffering, there is no joy in watching your parents self-destruct. But I was satisfied because the cycle was broken. Ashley was free. Grandma was safe. And I was no longer the invisible daughter. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Hello? Ashley's voice was tired. Background noise of a TV blaring, suggesting she wasn't in a quiet place. Hey, I said. I got a box from Mom today. Me too. Ashley sighed. She sent me my participation trophies from elementary school. Said she didn't have room for clutter. We both laughed. It was a dry, weary laugh, but it was shared. So, I said. I was thinking. I have a guest room here in Seattle. It's not huge, but it's quiet, and the view is better than a dental office parking lot. If you ever wanted to visit or look for jobs in a new city. There was a long pause. You'd do that? She asked, her voice cracking. After everything I said? The house is gone, Ash, I said firmly. The legacy is gone. But we're still sisters. And sisters help each other rebuild. I'd like that, she whispered. I'd really like that. The storm had passed. The house had fallen. But for the first time, the foundation, the real one, between us, was finally starting to set. It is exactly 1 year later, another Christmas Eve, but this time, there are no sequin dresses, no catered turkey that tastes like sawdust, and no crystal champagne flutes clinking with false promises. Instead, I am standing in my kitchen in Seattle, wearing flannel pajamas and fuzzy socks. Outside, the rain is lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, classic Pacific Northwest weather. But inside, it smells like cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee. Pass the icing, please, Ashley says. I look over at my sister. She is sitting at the island, her hair tied up in a messy bun, wearing an oversized mariner's sweatshirt I bought her. She looks different, not just because she ditched the heavy contouring makeup and the expensive jewelry, but because her shoulders aren't hunched up to her ears anymore. She looks lighter. It took 3 months for her to take me up on my offer. She arrived in Seattle in March, dragging 2 suitcases and a bruised ego. The first few weeks were hard. We had to relearn how to be sisters without our parents acting as the ringmasters of our rivalry. There were fights, real ones, about dishes and rent money, not passive-aggressive jabs about who was loved more, but we worked through them. She got a job as an office manager at a tech startup entry level, demanding, and completely hers. She pays me rent on the first of every month, and for the first time in her life, she knows exactly how much a gallon of milk costs. My phone buzzes on the counter. I glance at the screen. Incoming call. Dad. I don't feel that old spike of adrenaline anymore. I don't feel the guilt or the fear. I just look at Ashley. It's them, I say. Ashley stops icing a cinnamon roll. She looks at the phone, then at the rain outside, and finally back at me. A year ago, this call would have sent her into a spiral of tears and apologies. Today, she just shrugs. Let it go to voicemail, she says. If it's an emergency, the police will call. If it's a guilt trip, we don't have the budget for it. We let it ring. We know what they want. We heard through Aunt Karen, who finally broke her silence last month, that Mom and Dad are miserable. They hate their apartment. They hate their neighbors. They blame the economy, the bank, the government, and mostly, their traitorous daughters for their downfall. They are still waiting for the world to apologize to them. They are still waiting for a bailout that isn't coming. They lost the house, but they lost something much more valuable. The audience for their performance. Without us there to manipulate, to pit against each other, to project their insecurities onto, they are just 2 bitter people sitting in a room filled with boxes they refuse to unpack. Jason, for those wondering, is doing fine. Ashley bumped into him when she went back to grab her last box of winter clothes. He was civil. He's dating a teacher now. He told Ashley he didn't hate her, but he couldn't trust her. It hurt her to hear it, but she accepted it. She told me later that night, I'd rather be single and honest than married and hiding a grenade. The phone stops buzzing. The silence that follows isn't heavy or awkward. It's peaceful. You know, Ashley says, licking icing off her thumb. I used to think you were the lucky one because you got away. I thought you were selfish for leaving me behind with them. I was saving myself, I admit, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. I know, she says. And for a long time, I thought the house was the prize. I thought if I got the house, it meant I won the game. It meant I was worth something. She looks around my apartment. It's not a mansion. It doesn't have a formal dining room or a grand foyer, but it's paid for. The lights are on because I paid the bill. The food is here because we bought it. I realize now, Ashley continues softly, that the house wasn't the prize. It was the cage. And the debt wasn't just money. It was the obligation to keep their secrets. You didn't steal my inheritance, Sarah. You gave me the only one that mattered. Which is? I ask. A clean slate, she says. She raises her coffee mug. To freedom. I clink my mug against hers. Thud. A dull, ceramic sound that feels infinitely more real than the crystal chime from a year ago. To freedom, I reply. We spend the rest of the night watching terrible holiday movies and laughing until our sides hurt. We don't talk about the past. We don't analyze our parents. We just exist. Two women building a life on a foundation that won't crumble under the weight of a lie. My name is Sarah Bennett. I learned the hard way that you cannot save people who are addicted to their own drowning. You can only save yourself. And if you're lucky, you can throw a rope to the person swimming next to you. My parents tried to leave us a legacy of debt and deception. Instead, we built something else. We built a truth. And unlike that house on the hill, this is something no one can ever foreclose on. So, as I sit here looking at the rain, I have to ask you one last time. If you were sitting at that table, holding the binder that could destroy your family's illusion but save your future, would you have opened it? Or would you have let the secret stay buried for one more silent night? Tell me in the comments. And from my family, the real one, to yours, Merry Christmas.